20 episodes, 20 movies, over 2.5 decades of Studio Ghibli content. Insane. Well, today I watched Kaguya Hime no Monogatari, or The Tale of Princess Kaguya, which came out in 2013. Spoiler warning, and let's go. From my perspective, Princess Kaguya appeared to be the sleeper hit for Studio Ghibli even more than Porco Rosso, which I had at least heard a little buzz about before watching. But I didn't see anyone talking about Kaguya. Combined with the art style, this made me expect a much less traditional story from this film, and a much less traditional story I got. From the very first scene, I understood that this was probably a film I wasn't going to be able to approach with my normal mindset towards Ghibli movies, and even just movies in general. And I mean, I tried, but ultimately I don't think I could overcome the hurdle of this movie just being made for a completely different type of person than me. So as I understand it, Princess Kaguya is a sort of cultural story that the Japanese have, and this movie is an adaptation of that story. Unfortunately, I had never heard of Princess Kaguya before this film, and this film doesn't appear to go out of its way to be accessible to audiences who aren't familiar with its source material. This made it very difficult for me to get a grasp on where the narrative was going. I could follow the plot as it unfolded, but that was just because it's a very simple story. There are very few characters and they each do very little. Kaguya is impulsive and goes on these little adventures in the first act of the film, then she moves off to the capital and gets mad at how formal everyone is. Her dad is obsessed with such formalities and tries to force them onto Kaguya, convinced that this is her path to happiness. Her mom just enjoys being a country woman and does such activities throughout the film while being concerned for Kaguya. I could go on with these one-sentence descriptions of every character in the movie, and I feel like I'm relatively accurately describing their character for the majority of the film. It's also just like really repetitive, especially throughout the midsection. I was kind of just having fun before Kaguya moved into the mansion because I thought that she was just a charming character and I liked seeing her and the boys of the village just run around and do kid stuff. But then her dad gets it in his head that the heavens want him to take Kaguya to the city to live in a mansion, and this is where they started to lose me. Now again, I want to remind you that I'm unfamiliar with Japanese folklore, but the idea that the heavens wish for something to happen just comes across as a lazy way to advance the plot to me. The dad extrapolates so much information out of Kaguya and later a bunch of gold showing up from a bamboo plant that just doesn't follow any sort of logic whatsoever, in my head at least. To me, it really paints the dad in a negative light. It comes off like he's just coming up with different excuses to feel special about raising this clearly magical girl and then to live in a mansion and get a free pass into the 1% of society. He even calls the village folk that he used to be in a community with hillbillies. And then at the end of the movie, I'm supposed to believe that he was only doing all of this because he thought it was the best way to make Kaguya happy? Based on what I saw, it didn't look like he cared about her happiness at all, considering Kaguya was constantly expressing her displeasure with the life he was providing for her for literal years. The midsection of this movie is just people trying to force Japanese formalities onto Kaguya, then she doesn't like it and ends up not accepting them. The only time she really does kinda cave into the way that those around her want her to act is immediately followed up by them just trying to take it one step further, and Kaguya just puts up more resistance until like the last 25 minutes of the film. The repetition combined with just the usually slow pace of each scene quickly made me realize that this would be a difficult movie to sit through regardless of whether or not I liked it, especially considering this is, I think, the longest Ghibli film at about 2 hours and 15 minutes. As such, I did end up speeding up the movie, but I do truly believe that this only improved my experience with it, so I'm not gonna feel bad. The whole structure of the story might have been its biggest detriment to me, and it specifically rears its head in the very final scene wherein Kaguya is pleading to the moon people not to take her back because although humans kinda suck, they're also kinda based too. And that's totally a message I can get behind. It's the theme of many of my favorite works. But the thing is, Princess Kaguya, by virtue of its structure, really emphasizes the former half of that statement. We start off in the village with Kaguya having lots of friends and just being happy, but then once she moves off to the mansion where we spend like 75% of the story, she just seems to go on a downward spiral as it becomes more and more apparent that no one seems to really care about what would actually make her happy except her mom. But she isn't actually doing anything to make Kaguya happy, so it doesn't really matter. She did, of course, have that reunion with her friend from the village, but it was short-lived and basically just amounted to both of them thinking about what might have been. And what might have been would have been wonderful, but what actually happened is kinda super depressing. Plus, the final scene takes place in the mansion with her parents present and not the village folk, so it comes off like she's talking about her life as a princess rather than a life as a country girl when she's talking about how much she wants to stay on Earth. So for Kaguya to end off the movie being like, no, I actually like it here, just really doesn't feel justified to me. If I were in her shoes, I'd take my chances with the moon people. Okay, I need to move on to some positives because, believe it or not, there are positives. I really like the visual aesthetic of Princess Kaguya. It feels like a real successor to My Neighbors the Yamadas. It's washed out and yet often very detailed. The animation feels like butter, and the texture of the line art creates for some seriously intense iconography, at certain points of the film, of course. Particularly, I'm thinking of the scene where Kaguya is sprinting out of the house, leaving clothes scattered all over the floor as she makes her way outside and into the woods. Also, the music on display in this film is very unique, at least to my ears. The only thing I would compare it to that I've seen is Kung Fu Panda, and I wonder why that might be. As much as I would have liked to see more from the characters in Act 1, I did like how distinct each section of this movie felt. The narration adds to this feeling too. It does a really good job at making you feel like you're listening to a story that's been passed down orally through generations, as I'm sure the actual tale of Princess Kaguya was. I feel like I can tell where one chapter of the story begins and the other ends, which is a feeling I very much like. It feels like a fresh start each time we cut to a new setting or plot point, which makes me feel like I've made progress in the film. Despite my criticisms of the story, theme, and plot construction of Princess Kaguya, I actually do really like much of the beat-by-beat events that take place, and that's because this is such a unique and frankly weird movie. Like the scene towards the beginning of the film when Kaguya is still a baby and the village boys and her dad are trying to get her to walk towards them and just keep shouting "Lil Bamboo" and "Princess come here" over and over and over and over again, getting progressively more intense. My eyebrows just got higher and higher as that scene went along. It's so weird and I love it. Or what about when I think Kazuya got her first period? I think that's what that was. It wouldn't surprise me if that's what they were trying to communicate with that scene either way, but I've never seen something like that depicted in an animated film before, so that was at the very least memorable. Also, a lot of the middle section of the film is made up of scenes of Kaguya defying tradition for the sake of tradition, and I just really like the idea of a traditional story being about questioning tradition. Very based. Before I wrap up, I'd like to quickly touch on a few moments in this film where I was just confused. Maybe I was just missing something, or maybe I was supposed to know more about the story of Princess Kaguya outside of this movie. Either way, if anyone wants to explain this stuff to me, I'd be happy to hear it. First, am I supposed to think that the dad actually loves Kaguya? He retroactively says he only did everything in the movie because he thought it would make her happy, but it sure doesn't seem like it in the moment. Second, why was Kaguya sent down to Earth if the moon people were just going to bring her back up once she subconsciously asked to leave Earth? And if her desire to leave Earth is what caused them to come down and take her, why can she not just say, yo, never mind, I like it here? And third, why did Kaguya give in to the woman trying to turn her into a prim and proper princess? Like, there was this whole scene where she's plucking Kaguya's eyebrows and Kaguya cries like she doesn't want this to happen, but she still does it? Why? Closing thoughts, it comes off to me like the enjoyment to be found in this movie comes from just watching the events happen, because what actually happens is not bound by logic, at least any logic I'm familiar with. So probably the best way for a person like me to enjoy it is just to sit back and let it sort of happen in front of you. And even though I was pretty disappointed, I did still find a lot of stuff in this movie to enjoy, and it did keep me engaged, though that partially was because I had it sped up. Overall, I'm feeling about a 5 out of 10, but what did you think of Princess Kaguya? Let me know down in the comments if you had already seen this film or if you're watching these along with me. In the 21st installment of Watching Every Ghibli Movie, I'm going to be checking out Omoide no Marnie, or When Marnie Was There, so stick around for that. As always, thank you for watching, have a wonderful day, and I'll see you in the next one.